say, I am a Christian. But that means so many things to so many people. It's become so plastic that the word Christian doesn't mean what it used to mean. I mean, in the New Testament, the word Christian is only used 3 times, and it was what pagans called the disciples. Because the word disciple is used more than 250 times. You see, disciples are something different. All disciples are Christians, but not all people who say they are Christian are actually disciples. And how many of you know Jesus came to make disciples, not Christians? It's true. He came to make disciples. Now, if people want to call us Christians, that's fine. But God has called us to be a disciple, and that is something much deeper. And what we've been learning is that if you want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, if that's your plan, a disciple is an apprentice. A disciple is someone that follows the master, learns what the master does and says and thinks, and conforms their life to look like the master. That is a whole lot different than a religion. That's a whole lot different than I go to church every once in a while. That's a whole lot different than I know what a Bible is. I mean, I might have even read it, but that's different. Being a disciple is much deeper than that. In fact, we learned that if you want to be a disciple, you got to do 3 things. You got to connect, you got to grow, and you got to do. And what that means is you connect with God at a deeper level, at a level that transforms your heart. So you're no longer a person who follows a certain moral code, and that makes you a Christian. Anybody can follow a moral code, but not everybody has the courage. Not everybody has the willingness. Not everybody has the humility to go to God in a deep way to say, take me beyond the rules. Take me to a place where my heart is so transformed that it's not, I do not steal. But instead, you have rooted covetousness and the desire to ingratiate myself with materialism. You've just ripped it right out of my heart. So it's not just, I don't steal. It's, I don't covet. That's deeper. That's much deeper. And only God can get you there. Only an intimate, deep, real, humble, and honest relationship between you and the living God can get you there. So you got to learn to connect. That's what discipleship is. The second part is growing. If you're not deep in His Word, if you're not a fanatic when it comes to studying that Word and knowing it and memorizing it and listening to it and thinking about it and talking about it and hearing a pastor and going, I'm not just going to hear, I'm going to write that down, I'm going to learn, I'm going to study, I'm going to become a relentless student, because a disciple is an apprentice, a student. You got to be growing in His Word. And finally, you got to be a doer. You got to put it into practice, and that's what we talked about last time. We've got to choose the fruit of the Spirit, because every single time we run into a situation, whether it be an argument or a problem or something else that comes our way, we have an opportunity in that moment. We can choose our flesh, which says, be anxious, be angry, be self-centered, whatever it happens to be. Or we can choose the Spirit, which says self-control, kindness, gentleness, even to my enemies. And when you choose the fruit of the Spirit, God will empower you from within to act it out. But until you choose it, you're not going to feel like it. You will not feel like walking in the Spirit. You will not feel like doing what the Bible says. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control are not natural. They are supernatural. You must choose it, and only God can empower it. You can't fake it. That's doing. But I want to take doing to a little bit deeper level over the next few weeks. I want to get into some practical stuff. So this message today is designed to be very practical, something you can use. Like you went to a college class and you actually gained something instead of going to the college class and going, why did I take that? I just needed 3 credits. No, this is a real class, something you can really use, really take home, really do. Now, we've been studying from Romans, there we go, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Disciples live this 24/7. That's what they do. They are living sacrifices. This is particularly true when you're dealing with people you don't like. There's going to be people you don't like. There's going to be people that don't get along with you. But if you're a living sacrifice, you will offer your body as a living sacrifice. You will sacrifice your own self-interest. You will sacrifice your own feelings, and you will do what is right because it's right, not because you feel like doing it. That's a living sacrifice. So what do? You do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but instead you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. You're studying the Word, and you're renewing your thinking so that you think like Jesus. Then, and at that point, this is the do part, you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, His pleasing, and His perfect will. Now, the pattern of this world you can find in Galatians 5. The pattern of this world is the flesh. The pattern of this world is based on fear and self-centeredness. That's what it's based on. And in Galatians 5 and in other places, we have explained and we have learned that what the flesh wants more than anything else, the flesh is 100% self-centered. You are a triune being. You are made of 3 parts. You're in the image of God, who is also a triune being. He's a Trinity. You have a body that you live in. But that's not the real you, and we all know it. Because we can all sit there with a big smile on our body, and we're seething inside. And we know it. You are a triune being. You have a mind, will, and emotions complex, and then you have a spirit. Now, until you become a Christian, your spirit is dead. But when you become a Christian, your spirit is resurrected, and it is brand new. And here's the problem. Your mind, will, and emotions are still affected by a flesh suit that you live in that is 100% self-centered. 100%. It's all about you. Okay? And your personality and your mind, will, and emotions wants to go that way because it's used to it. That's the habit. But now that your spirit has been made new in Christ, your spirit wants to please God. Your flesh does not. And it never will. You cannot negotiate with the flesh. You cannot reason with your flesh. You can never argue your way out of a temptation. Every time you've tried, you failed, and you know it. You cannot argue with it. The flesh wants what it wants, when it wants it, and it doesn't care who gets in the way. And if it's left to itself, it will lead to murder, narcissism, theft, and every other kind of evil you can imagine. Just read Galatians 5, and it will show you this. Now, I'm going to tell you that nowhere is this evidenced more in the Christian life than how you deal with money and possessions. Stuff. There are too many Christians that have a stuffitis disease. They are materialists. They got to have more, and they got to have more, and they don't realize that that's feeding the flesh constantly. We need to understand that people can worship money. They can, and they often do. People can worship money. They can crave it, steal it. They'll even kill for it, just for money. Money is a powerful lure, and it's dangerous. We have to understand that money in and of itself is just paper and coins or electronic digits in a bank account. It's neutral. It's what your heart does with it. That's the difference. You see, Jesus said this. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, I didn't say those words. Jesus said that. He's saying, wherever you treasure things, whatever you spend your money on, whatever you invest in demonstrates, it shows where you spend your heart. It shows where your passion is. So, by consequence, if your finances are a mess, odds are your spiritual life is a mess too. Because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your treasure is a disaster. 9 times out of 10, your spiritual life will be too. Now, I want to put a caveat on that because that can be a dangerous teaching. Jesus said this, but he said it to a group of people who were very rich, the Pharisees. You see, they believed because they were rich, they were blessed by God. And Jesus is saying, that is not so. That is not so. But he is saying that what you do with what God has given you, whether it's this much or this much, regardless of how much, what you do with it, that is determining where your heart is. So if I take my money and I'm pouring it into education, then I value what? Education. If I'm pouring my time and my resources and my finances into brand new stuff all the time, then what do I value? Where's my heart? It's in getting more stuff. Does that make sense? Now, if you're going to be a disciple of Jesus, now listen carefully to this. If you're going to be a real disciple, you must take control of your finances. You must. Because right now, your finances control you. Isn't that right? I mean, we can't do X because we don't have enough money. We can't do Y because if we do that, then we can't do Z. It controls you. And if you don't learn how to take control of your finances as a disciple of Jesus Christ, then your finances control you. And God does not want you to be under the control of anyone or anything other than Him. So you must learn to take control of your finances. Where your treasure is, there your passions will follow. Where your treasure is, that's where your commitments are going to follow. Where your treasure is, how it is, your heart's going to follow the money. And that's a hard teaching. But I didn't say it, so don't blame me. Jesus said it. You see, too many Christians do not take control of their finances. And the results are dismal. Listen to this. Only 1 in 5 people in America, 1 in 5 couples in America, uses any form of a budget at all. Only 1 in 5. Now, what that means is they don't realize that money is the number one identifiable cause of divorce. Yet only 1 in 5 of them even try to take control of their finances. Only 1 in 5. Now, statistically speaking, families in America carry $2.1 trillion in debt in America. $2.1 trillion. That is up from $351.9 billion in the late 70s. That's how much debt we carry now in comparison to what it was in the 70s. That's a lot. About 50% of families in America spend somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000 per month on debt alone. They're not even paying for their regular bills. The average household in America has $38,000 in credit card debt alone. $38,000. That doesn't even include your mortgage, not even close. Add the mortgage on top of that, and we are so upside down that only 10% of American households are financially stable. Only 10%. Less than 2% of American households will be actually ready to retire at retirement age. 2. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. 78% of Americans are 1 paycheck away from bankruptcy. 1. Lose a job, you lose everything. And that's where we are as a society. Our entire society, our entire culture has become so wrapped around indulge the flesh. You got to have a bigger house. You got to have a new car every 2 years. Do you really? Oh, well, the car salesman will tell you that. They're going to blast it across. Everybody has a car payment, right? Well, sure they do. Just ask any car salesman. They'll tell you that, right? The list goes on. If we do not take control of our finances, we've got a problem. And that's the first key. If you are a disciple of Jesus, you must give careful attention to your finances so you can give careful attention to your faith. Don't let money, or the lack of it, become a problem for you. Now, there's a lot of bad teaching on this stuff in Christian circles. The number one bad teaching on this is just give more and everything will be solved. You are never going to hear me say that because it's a lie. In fact, the first thing I'm going to teach you has nothing to do with giving at all. Because what I want to teach you is biblical financial management. I'm going to give you a little class here on how to take control of your finances, and I assure you, it has nothing to do with giving more to this church. It doesn't. Because I want you to not have to live in fear anymore. I am tired of the number of people that come to me in absolute agony because they lost a job and now they're losing everything. I don't want you to have to live in that fear. I don't want you to have to live under that stress anymore. I don't want you to have to be in fights with your spouse week in and week out and month in and month out because of money. It's stupid. It's little green pieces of paper. Why are you fighting over it? Because you haven't got control over it. It's controlling you. And I don't want you to have to live like that. I'm on your team. I want to help you. This church wants to help you. So here's what we're going to do. Not only are we going to teach you this stuff, but we're offering this class. I want you to put this down in your cell phone, on your calendar now. Our January 16th and 17th, it's a Friday night, Saturday, and the 23rd, 24th, another Friday, Saturday. We're going to do a seminar. It's 14 hours worth of material from the best teacher on money that's out there, Dave Ramsey. The Financial Peace University, we are offering it here, and we want you to take it. We want you to take it. We want to help you. We want to set you free. So let's learn a little bit about financial management, and then we'll get back to what this is going to look like later. We're going to jump to the book of Proverbs. How many of you know that Proverbs was written by the richest man in the history of the human race? Nobody knew money better than Solomon. He was the richest man in history. Statistically speaking, if you take what Solomon had and account for inflation and account for, changes in, money values and whatever, he would still be head and shoulders above everybody else as the richest man who ever lived. If somebody knew something about money, it would be the richest man who ever lived. What he had to say. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23. He said, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds. For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. When the hay is removed and new growth appears and the grass from the hills is gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing and the goats with the price of a field. You will have plenty of goat's milk to feed you and your family and to nourish your servant girls." Now, when you first read this and you're reading about goats and goat's milk, I don't like goat's milk, so I'm not really interested in having any more. Okay? So it looks at first glance like this does not apply. But how many of you know that God's word is always true and there's something you can gain from it, even in the 21st century? You can get this. Now take a look at what he is really saying. When he says, pay careful attention to your herds, he's using a Jewish word, a Hebrew word, sheath. Sheath means to place, fix, or put something. Now, what he's trying to say here is that you need to learn to set boundaries or categories over what you have. He's saying, pay careful attention to this, guys. Don't forget this part. It's simple, but it's hard to do. This is what he's trying to say. As a disciple of Jesus Christ, as a follower of the living God, you are expected to manage the resources that God has provided for you. You're expected to be a good manager of that. But you got to know what you're managing, or how can you manage it? If you don't know the first step, what do I actually have? The odds are that the majority of you, if I asked you how much money do you have in the bank right now, you'd go, I don't know, about. No, it can't be about. Pay careful attention. No, most of us don't. Less than 1 in 5 of us use a budget, so we haven't got a clue how much we actually have. We've missed the simplest and the most important step. What do you actually have? Most people have no idea. And it's easy, incredibly easy to get so busy and so distracted by just going to work that when you come home, you're tired and you don't want to sit down and balance the checkbook. You don't want to figure out what you actually have. You want to push a little button and watch a screen. That's what you want to do. That's what I would like to do, except that I don't have the screen or the button anymore. I got rid of my TV, which is a very good plan, by the way, but that's a whole other message. But anyway, what I want to say is that most of us don't inventory. We don't inventory. We don't actually know what we have. Too many of us make decisions financially based on what we think we have, not on what we actually have. That's why he says the first step to being wise with what you have is to know what you have. And that's extremely important because he uses this word sheath and it's in the imperative. That means this is a command. It's not a suggestion. This is God saying, hey, I've given you so much. You better know what I gave you. You better know. And it's incredibly important because you can't make financial decisions on maybe. Not good ones. You got to know what you have. You got to take the time. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, why this can bite you. This picture is the ruined cathedral in Berlin, and right after the end of the war. And in 1987, I jumped on a train from Amsterdam, and I went there. I wanted to see this. And I did not pay careful attention to what I had in my wallet. I bought a train ticket, round trip, and I forgot several things. First of all, at that time, this was still West Germany. So I'm going right into the heart of the Soviet Union. Does that make sense? There were still walls up, still barbed wire, still dogs and machine guns. So when you get stuck in Berlin, you're not going anywhere until the proper train comes back out again. Does that make sense? It's not like, oh, well, I ran out of money. I need to go back to Amsterdam. Didn't work. See, when I got there, I realized, well, I spent some money on a couchette instead of sleeping on the in the cheap seats. And I spent this and I spent that. Why? Because I'm 20 and I didn't know what I had. And all of a sudden, I ran out of money. And I'm sleeping on a park bench in Berlin. And I didn't eat for 2 solid days because I didn't know what I had. It was a tough lesson to learn. I remember getting on the train and finally getting back to going back to Amsterdam, going, I can't wait to get there because somebody will have food. That's where I was, on a Russian train. It was very interesting. But anyway, you cannot build a well-maintained life. You cannot avoid debt. You cannot get to a place where you're going to be generous until you understand and are right on top of what are your assets in the first place. In fact, I'm here to tell you that if you don't do this, if you don't leave this place today and say, all right, that's it, I'm going to take control, then you're being disobedient. And men, this falls to you primarily in your home. You are required by God to lead your home. Take control of the finances in your house. And start with, let's figure out what we actually have. Let's take an inventory. And if it takes you 2 weeks, it takes you 2 weeks. But you see, we as men tend to want to not be responsible for things. It started all the way back with a guy named Adam who said, well, the woman you gave me, it's all her. No, it's not. God said, no, Adam, knocking you out, pal. You had the responsibility. Are you right? And we're all sons of Adam, and none of us want to take responsibility. Still don't. Look, it's not your wife's fault. It's not your job's fault. It's It's your fault. You may delegate, but you oversee. Larry's all, can I? Yes, you may delegate. But you've got to take control over it. Delegation, I've learned the hard way, though, Larry, honestly. I've learned the hard way that I can delegate something and then not oversee it. And, yeah, then you get bit. If you delegate it, you're going, so how's it going there? You better check it out, okay? You better be on top of it. And it's important because if you are untrustworthy with worldly wealth, Jesus said that, well, then how can you be trusted with true riches of heaven? In other words, so many of us want the spiritual benefits that the Lord offers. We want those spiritual rewards. We want not only the fruit of the Spirit in our life, but we want to go to heaven and have buckets and buckets of reward. He's not going to give it to you if you can't control dollars and cents. If you want to be a disciple, take control. So the first thing is you got to know what you have in the first place. That's the first principle. You must know and account for what you've been given to manage in the first place. This is simple, but most of us do not do it. We do not sit down and figure out what we actually have. Now, I'm preaching this message on this weekend on purpose because most of us get paid Friday. You're coming into the first of the month. This is your opportunity over the next few days to take that sheet of paper or something like it that I put in your bulletin and go, all right, let's figure it out. We know we got a paycheck coming in. Most of us have it automatically dumped right into our account at midnight on Thursday. So you know what's coming in. Write it down. Figure it out. Start there. And you may need to take a full inventory of all the junk you have, too, in your house. How much stuff do you have? All right, take a look at the next principle. It says, when the hay is removed and new growth appears and the grass from the hills is gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing and the goats with the price of a field. So he's talking about somebody who has all these goats and all this stuff, and he knows what he has, and it's out there in the field. And when you talk about flocks and you talk about goats, he's talking about whatever it is that actually provides you with a living. Now, for most of us, that's dollars, not goats. There are a few people out there, though, that run farms around here, and they would honestly say, yeah, that cow's worth a lot to me. All right, but for most of us, it's dollars and cents instead of goats. And he's explaining, okay, the first part is knowing what you have, but the second part, you got to know what to spend. Take a look at this. When the hay is removed, what's he talking about? He's talking about you're out there and you figured out that, well, goats need to eat something. They need to eat grass and hay, and you have to provide that. In the same way, the first thing you need to do after you figure out what you have is you've got to figure out what your basic needs are, and you must account for them first. We don't do this. Remember, only 1 in 5 people actually does any kind of budget planning at all. So we don't set aside for clothes. We don't set aside for groceries. What we do is we fly by the seat of our pants. Most of us do this. We go to the grocery store without a list, and we're just pushing through the cart going, ooh, look at that. Ooh, look at this. I mean, that's what we do. We buy on impulse. We live on impulse. And we're dumb enough to go shopping when we're hungry. We don't plan. We don't think it through. And when we do that, when we take it for granted, we end up spending on impulse. So he's saying, no. Figure out what your flocks need. What does your family need? What do they actually have to have? And plan for it. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect because notice what he said. He said, when the hay is removed and new growth appears. What he's saying is that sometimes there are things that you can't really account for. You don't have to be perfect at this. You say, we're going to spend this much in groceries. We're going to spend this much in a clothing fund. By the way, if you set aside an envelope and you just start putting money in for your clothing fund, you know, even if it's a few bucks, by the time you actually need something, you're going to have a whole lot of bucks in there. If not, here's what happens. Oh, I got to have it now. So what do? Credit card, bam, 28% interest compounded daily. And you are a slave to that little piece of plastic because you needed another shirt. If you had an envelope that you kept stuff because you took account for what your family needs. This kid keeps growing on me. If I don't keep putting money in an envelope, man, I'm in trouble. I tried to put a brick on his head, but it didn't work. Now, the thing is, if I don't take thought and categorize it, I'm going to be in trouble. Now, he says sometimes the grass from the fields comes in. Now, what does that mean? It means, listen, you must be ready at all times to seek out an opportunity and adjust as you go. In other words, if you're setting aside for categories and all of a sudden you get a windfall, and this happens all the time, people get extra money. And because they're not ready for that grass in the hills, what do they do with it? It's gone. They spend it. Happens all the time. No, you have to be the word disciple means disciplined. That's where the word comes from. It's where we get money coming in that we didn't expect, grass from the hills, and we go, whoa, 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 we're going to think about our needs first. And we're going to go put it into our categories. Needs first, wants way last. And you have to live like that if you want to be a true disciple. So notice what he's talking about here. He says, the lambs will provide you with clothing and the goats for the price of a field. In other words, we're talking about, and goat's milk, we're talking about needs, and there's a very big difference between needs and wants, and we don't know the difference in America. We don't. We think we need cable TV. In fact, we need it so bad that we have congressional wars over the cost of a television program. Congressional investigations. Oh, it costs too much. This is a basic need. No, it's not. But we think, oh, I can't live without a cell phone. You know what? I actually didn't get my first cell phone until I was 30, and I lived. I survived. But we think we must. We think we must. We think we must have. No, figure out what your needs are and start there. Learn to live within your needs, okay? Because now here's the hard part. Here's the hard part. We naturally don't want to do this. We naturally do not want to be disciplined because our flesh says, no, I got to go out to eat now. And I don't have any money in the going out to eat envelope, so I'm going to raid every other envelope for McDonald's. No. We have to learn to say, flesh, I crucify you. You dead to me. I live according to the Spirit. And the Spirit says, take care of those needs first. And when new grass comes in, you go and you put it in the right spot. Now, here's what we want to do. And here's the hard part. And this is especially going to be aimed at men. But listen to this. The temptation is to quit. We start doing this. We try. Now, I'm here to tell you that I've been living on the Dave Ramsey system for 4 years. And the truth is, I have fallen off the wagon a dozen times or more. And the temptation is when you fall off and you quit doing it and you raided all your envelopes for McDonald's again and you do something like that and all of a sudden you can't pay the insurance bill or whatever it happens to be because you didn't take thought, you want to beat yourself half to death. You want to quit. You want to give up. Don't. You can do this. You can do this. You can start on the very next paycheck and do better than you did last time. And every time you do it better than the last time. That way you don't waste your time. When you do that over and over again, see, we don't want to do that because as men, the Bible says we are cursed. We are cursed. We live in a cursed world. That means we're going to sweat and all we're going to get is more thorns. And that's the pain in the neck about it. You work really hard and you set aside in your envelopes and then bang, something comes up, another thorn comes up, and all you want to do is quit. And you think to yourself, is it ever going to get better? Yes, in heaven. But between now and then, you stay disciplined and you recognize the fact that it's going to be more thorns. That's why you have an emergency fund. And you never raid it unless it's really an emergency. Number one thing about budgeting is this here, the grass in the fields. You must have an emergency fund. Now, Dave Ramsey teaches us that the first thing you do when you want to get your financial house in order is you save $1,000. That's your emergency fund. You don't do anything else. You start there. Get an emergency fund because I'm absolutely guaranteeing you something will break. Guaranteed. So you set aside the grass and the hills. That's what Solomon is saying. He's saying you set aside for your needs, and then you realize I better cultivate some of this. If I don't, bad things are going to happen. So you set aside an emergency fund first thing before you do anything else. So if you leave here today, you go, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to set aside a savings account. We're going to put $1,000 in there. Now, if it takes you 1 week or 12 months, you get that $1,000. Start there. Now, that's what we're, the second principle here. Am I on the right? Yeah, I am. The second principle of budgeting is that you got to control your expenses. You got to plan for your needs first, your wants second. Now, that sounds so stupidly simple. It's like, well, duh. Well, then why do only 1 in 5 of us do this if it's so simple? Because sometimes things are simple to understand, but they're incredibly hard to do. Because the flesh just wants to be lazy. The flesh wants to indulge. The flesh wants more sugar. The flesh wants, you know what I mean? Everybody says, hey, the key to weight and everything, diet and exercise, simple. Eat right, exercise more. Well, if it's so simple, why do we have to have another best-selling book about the same stupid thing? Eat right, exercise. Okay, it's not rocket science. It may be easy to understand, but really hard to do. So what are you going to have to do, disciple? You're going to have to connect. You're going to have to connect. You have to be empowered to do this. If you're not praying through this, you're never going to make it. If you're not connecting with Jesus in prayer and going, God, give me the heart, give me the strength to take control of this, because my flesh doesn't want to. My flesh wants to self-indulge. My flesh wants to go, you know what, I'll just buy now and pay later, but I'm here to tell you, you will pay later. A lot. Dave Ramsey puts it this way. He says, look, if you learn to live now like nobody else lives, because the rest of the culture is all up to their eyeballs in debt and impulse buying and spending and waste, you learn to live like no one else now. Later, you get to live like nobody else because you have the reserves and you can go out and do things that you want to do. It's true. So that's the same thing. Now, let me give you an example from my personal life so that you can know that I always have to live this stuff before I get to preach it. There is a time in my recent life where I got my little envelopes, but I would tell people, yeah, I'm on the Dave Ramsey system about 60%. I still had the 40% of, well, whatever, I got an ATM card. That's why I've been on it for 4 years instead of 2 to get out of debt, okay? Because I keep falling off the wagon. And one of those, and I'm here to make fun of myself, is I know that my daughter flies from Texas to Phoenix 3 times a year to visit me. And I have to pay for that. I have to pay for that ticket. But every time, not sometimes, every time I'm getting down to the wire, I'm supposed to buy this ticket 30 days out. That's what the agreement says. And I'm always 25, 26, 20 days out because I didn't have the money. And I'm stealing from the grocery envelope, and we're eating top ramen for 2 weeks because I have to buy a ticket. And when you buy a ticket coming up towards Thanksgiving, 20 days out, a round-trip ticket is going to be $650. And it kept hitting us year after year after year because Pat Marks would not take control of his finances the way a disciple should. And the Lord got all over me and said, you cannot teach this if you don't do it. And I said, 6 months ago, I went, okay, I'm done with this. And I said, I'm going from 60% to 100%. We're on the system. We're doing this, darn it. And so I sat down and I got my envelopes out and I started putting money away. And the most amazing thing happened recently. This is November. My daughter's coming out. But I got to buy that ticket 54 days out because I had the money. And I bought it for $380. And I went, wow, I'm normally spending $600-700. I got it for nearly half price because I set aside. If you don't do this, you get bit hard. If you forget that registration comes every year or 2 years, most of us is every year in Arizona because we're not disciplined enough to buy 2 years out. Because oh my gosh, I got to pay the registration again. We don't set aside. So the first thing about biblical budgeting, this is Bible stuff, man. Know what you got. And second, set aside for your needs. Set aside for it. That's what you got to do. This is not rocket science. Now, take a look at this. He says, then, once you do this, you'll be provided with clothing. The goats for the price of a field. You'll have plenty of goat's milk to feed you and your family and nourish your servant girls. What's he talking about here? He's talking about considering all of these categories here. Family, your future, the field, your employees, all of these types of things. He's saying, look, if you set aside income for all of these things, you'll have it when you need it. That's it. This is the richest man that ever lived. Do this. But we don't. Only 1 in 5 of us will even try. The rest of us, when a real need comes up, we whip out another credit card. That's why we have $38,000 plus in credit card debt. And the interest rate on that will make you a slave for 30 years to those phone calls, to all that stress, to we can't do anything, to the fights and everything that goes along with it. Knock it off, disciple. You take control of your finances if you want to really serve God, because if not, then your finances are controlling you, and you're not being ruled by God, you're being ruled by what you have in the bank. And that's not what God wants out of you. Listen, this is going to require discipline. But that's what the word disciple means, disciplined. This is extremely important. Listen, disciple, it's time to renew your mind on this. Renew your mind. You've not been under a controlled financial system. What you've been doing is, oh my gosh, we got to have a car. So you go out and buy one instead of thinking it through. And you don't realize that you went out and bought a car, 6 years, financed at this incredible interest rate. You're going to spend 4 times what it's worth. And as soon as you drive it off the lot, it just dropped by 1/3. Just driving off the lot, you can't even get rid of it. Why? I'm gonna confess a horrible crime to you. When I was 19 years old, I was a car salesman. I know. It's a dreadful secret. Please don't spread it around. But I'm here to tell you, that car dealer is not your friend. Not your friend. And I know from personal experience how much profit is packed into that car. I know, because I was there. And the truth of the matter is, we would talk about in sales meetings keeping people hooked. What you would do is they would come in, they would owe more on the car than it's worth, and that's their trade-in. No problem. Wrap what they owe into the next loan. Why? Because it keeps them hooked for life. That was their goal. That was fully their goal, was to keep you hooked for life. The borrower is the slave of the lender. That's what the Bible says. So don't live like this. Today, after following the Dave Ramsey program, my cars are paid for. I'm down to only one debt left that Melissa and I are knocking out. Took 4 years to do that, but I went from a lot of stress and pressure to, hey, we're almost there. No problem. I got my envelopes. We've got a scheduled freedom date. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to call Dave on the phone. Okay, but anyway, here's the thing. The third principle of biblical budgeting is that you need to set aside provision for areas of need that might arise in the future. So you need to set this aside. So there's basically 3 points to this. But here's my question for you today. Listen carefully to me. How will you decide to change? Because unless you've really got this down, and I'm willing to bet that there's less than 20% of the people in this room have got this covered. Less than 20%. What can you do to get started? Here's what I think you should do. It's the end of the month. I put a budget worksheet in there for you. Use it or something like it. Here's your assignment. I am the teacher. You are the student. Here's the assignment. Go figure out what you have. Go figure out what your real needs are that are coming up. Calculate it out. If you're having trouble with the math, ask Nathan. He's really good at math. But here's the thing. Figure it out. Whatever is left, you must account for that. Once you've got your needs, what you're going to want to do is take that bottom line. You're going to take whatever's left, and you want to go, oh, blow money. No. Now it's time to start setting aside for the future. It's time to start thinking ahead. It's time to start putting those things into practice. If you need help, we have financial counselors here, people that have been on the Dave Ramsey program and have paid off all of their debts and are doing well. They will be happy to meet with you. If you need to talk to me about that, let me know, and I will set you up with one of our counselors. Now, one of the first things I would tell you to do is this. Set aside for giving to God first. Now, when I say set aside for giving to God first, some people will give a big speech about tithing at this point. I'm not going to do that. We'll cover tithing another time. When you're getting started on this and your finances are a mess, look, if it's $1, make a choice. Make a number and say, I put God first. I don't care what it is. I'm not trying to put pressure on you. I'm trying to encourage you. Start. Say, look, I'm going to take control of these finances, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make God my priority. Now, I don't care if it's $1. You make a decision and stick to it. Are you with me? Now, don't jump out and say you're going to do 50% of your income. I don't think you can handle that. But if you can, we could use it. Okay? No problem. I actually know somebody who does 50% of their income and they give it away. It's true. Because if you can get disciplined enough, you could do that. Now, here's the thing. You set aside for the Lord first. Second, start saving for your emergency fund. And third, put an envelope and put Financial Peace University on it. Because this will cost you. I don't know what the cost is yet. We haven't calculated it, but it's going to be somewhere around $150, I'm guessing. Now, why? Because Dave knows that if you pay for something, you value it. This is not going to be free. I will teach you for free here on Sunday morning. Our financial counselors here, if you need to meet with them, they will meet with you for free. But Financial Peace University will cost you because that means you're going to be there. I don't want people signing up, and we got signed up for 50, and 10 people show up. Now, if you paid for it, you'll be there. It's amazing. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If it costs you, you'll be there. Does that make sense? So set aside those 3 envelopes. Do that first, and that's a good place to go. Now, the plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. If you want this to work for you, you've got a plan for it. Now, I have been given permission to use this testimony. Our worship pastor and his wife, Dennis and Ellie, are the people that I'm going to use as an example. When they first heard about this program and they realized that this is biblical, they realized that if they didn't get a hold of this as a young married couple, they were going to be in bad shape. They realized this is a spiritual problem. It's not just that we don't make enough money and we're kids. They went, we got to do something about this. When they realized they must take control, they had $25,000 in credit card and student loan debts. 25 grand. But they sat down as a couple and they went 100%, cold turkey, straight out. We're going to do the envelopes and we're going to do this. They set aside their $1,000 emergency fund and they started working the system. They paid every penny of that off in just 2 years. All of it. Gone. Yes. And Dennis is the first to tell you that it's not Dennis and Ellie that deserve the credit for this. It's the master who said, do it this way. Be disciplined. And how many times did you guys have to pray when you didn't want to follow the system? When your flesh wanted to go this way? You lost track of the number of times, right? And you see, when they did this, they learned to connect with God at a deeper level in order to get the strength to do it. They grew. They grew as people and learned to be disciplined instead of self-centered. And they were doers. So in the 3rd year, They went, well, if we've paid off all this debt and we've done well and we don't have the stress and pressure anymore, let's just keep doing things God's way and see what happens. So in their third year, they were able to save in a down payment and buy a home. Your average 25-year-old couple cannot buy a house. Not on making less than $50,000 a year, but they can, and they do. And they make it work month in and month out because they follow this. If they can do this, you can do this. Now, let's do a quick review and then we'll pray. Bible-based financial planning goes like this. The first thing is examine what you got. List it out. Know what God has given you. What's your income? The second thing is that you need, what do you got to purchase? Consider what you are spending by your category and figure it out by needs, not wants. And thirdly, preserve. Know what you need to cut back on and what do you got to set aside for in the future. Simple stuff, but if you follow it, it will revolutionize your life. I just gave you a real-life example. I mean, a couple of 25-year-old kids that go out and do that. They're not kids anymore. They're way grown up. Way more than a lot of 50-year-olds I know that are still up to here in debt. You don't have to be there. You don't have to live like that. You do not. And you don't have to make huge money. You darn well know he's not making a whole lot of money playing that guitar every weekend. I assure you he's not. He can still qualify for access, so I'm telling you that. Why? Not to put the hurt to him, but to tell you that you don't have to make buckets and buckets of money in order to follow this and have it work out for you. He has no debt and a nice home. And he's doing that on an income where everybody else says it can't be done. Yes, it can. If you're disciplined. How do you get there? Connect. You got to connect with God in prayer. You got to connect with other disciples to hold you to account. You know, one of my favorite people to hold me to account is Dennis, because every time I want to go to Starbucks, he goes, envelope. Connect with God and with each other. Grow.